Today we have John Schlup from Chemical Engineering, and we're delighted to draw in a new friend that deals with writing across the curriculum. And John, you and I have talked about how sometimes engineers are like, oh, I don't want to write, I don't want to teach writing, and yet you have to. And tell us a little bit about what you do.
What's important to realize is that historically our department has included writing as a significant part of a laboratory sequence.
Right.
I've often told incoming high school students and freshmen that I actually view us as maybe having 5 semesters of writing experience because of just the amount of writing historically we've done within our own laboratory environment. And so we have seen that need, and of course now with accreditation and a variety of factors, the soft skills are of course being emphasized more and more, and there's always this question of how to incorporate them into the program. But I think throughout our college it's largely felt if we just leave it to the 2 classes or 3 classes they take as part of general education, we're not going to get the job done, and our clients in industry and others want to see us incorporating more and more of this into daily exercise.
I know that you developed something to try to help your students along with the writing output. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, let me provide some background first of all in terms of how I got into it, because I think that to me is as much motivation as a specific tool. I would be working with trying to grade these laboratory exercises, and again, these are not fill the blank. We give them a structured experiment to do, but then they're to develop a report, much like they would if they were in industry.
Sure.
Okay. So then it's a matter of how do I grade that, and how do I try to provide consistency in that assessment. And initially I had gone through and I broke the section down in so many points per section and so forth, and I would go through and of course edit significantly. And again, one of the topics everyone's concerned about now is, well, how do you provide feedback to the students? And we have not historically said, well, here's our comments, change it. We've said, here's our comments, let's do a better job the next time.
Live with the grade.
Live with the grade, but you're going to learn and they're going to get better and better as you go through it. Well, the problem I started to sense some years ago was that I could make a lot of comments and give a lot of input to the students, but it seemed many times that the students would get lost in the forest.
Sure.
And so they would come back and then want to make changes, but we wouldn't often see a consistent set of changes being, how should I say, becoming lifestyle.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that was difficult was I'm not sure that it really gave them an overall sense of how they were improving. If they looked at these things, were they getting better or how were they getting better? They were focusing on detail, what are the main points? At that same time, my children were going through the elementary school system, and we were getting exposed as parents to, I believe it's sixth grade writing. And so visiting with one of the teachers that my children had, I began to discuss, well, what about developing something like this that could be applied for technical writing? And of course, obviously, it may not even need to be broken down that way, but of course what they had was geared for elementary school, and so we began to explore that possibility. So what I tried to do with this is to come through and say, well, if I develop a 6-trait rubric, the students can see in advance and kind of know what those numbers mean. It might seem less subjective. And then the other thing is, while I can find details in the reports and let them see, no, this is where I see room for improvement. While I can do that individually and still give all of that detail, the rubric kind of puts that detail aside and says, here's how you're doing in clarity or your ideas, and your way of expressing ideas is getting better. And that tends to get lost the way I was grading it before. So this is a way of allowing me to provide individual point-by-point input with the red ink on the lab report, and yet at the same time when they take a sheet and look at a breakdown of that, well, now maybe it provides them a better look at, oh, I am getting better at this. And they get to see the whole forest now and not get lost in the trees. Well, that's the hope.
I know K-12 teachers would love what you're doing because they want that 6th trait writing to be carried through into the collegiate setting so that the students can see that it is a lifelong skill.
Right. And they're using, I work with the English, with a liaison committee between English and our college, and as I understand it, they're using something similar to that with the Composition 1 course. That's a matter now of how to maybe take that a step further, and of course, obviously, down the path, how do we maybe integrate it even more?
Right. Maybe just talk a little bit, of course, this DVD is, we're trying to help other teachers apply some of these ideas in their curriculum and see if we can share ideas that might work in engineering, but it might work in horticulture too. So kind of talk a little bit about your ideas.
Okay, the first one, and this is where I have a 7th trait instead of the 6th. While particularly with our first course, the writing is the real emphasis, the technical content should be relatively straightforward. But the idea would be that no, there needs to be a technical content in here. And so I've added a 7th trait, and it's technical, and you can see that I've weighted it a little differently than some of the others. Because again, I've tried to avoid having 2 grades. I've tried to avoid having a technical grade and a writing grade. So I've got a technical content here, and basically, again, when you look at the rubric, you know, the 2 is down there. They just don't really seem to have an understanding of what's going on.
And content is vital. I mean, especially in technical writing and chemical engineering, they have to know the content and the technical aspects
Exactly.
of it.
And again, when you talk about can this be extended, I think maybe if someone wanted to, they could delete out the word technical and put content here. Because again, I think the features of this are fairly generic. 6 traits are the 6 traits. The features are fairly generic, and what we need to learn how to do is maybe modify this for a memo, modify this for a business letter.
That's a good idea.
So. But then again, you could just leave content there. With our student, my first attempt, I've got technical thrown in there as well. What I've tried to do is then modify or change slightly the terminology with the 6th trait. And again, I have to give a lot of credit there. I mean, this was an awfully good example to start working with. But the ideas, again, this is mainly, is it clear, is it focused, have they got things that grab a reader's attention, are they laying things out well? If it's not a good example, then you're going to see something that seems to meander through the material. Organization, again, if we don't organize, again, be it a business letter, being a report, if it's not well organized, it's not what we need, and we need to work on that. So I've got an organization component.
And I want our students, to realize that when you are a degreed individual, that you have a Kansas State University degree, that indicates, I hope, that you can write at these levels, and we want that for them. And I think sometimes they just don't carry over. They don't realize that this carries from their English, from their training, from the technical writing to a memo in their office when they get hired.
Well, and I don't think people realize how important it is to be able to communicate those. When I work with the students, yes, you may be telling people things that you assume they already know, but the idea, for example, with some of our technical writing is to guide the people to see what you want them to see. Now that can be, I need to persuade them, I need for them to see this so that they make decisions, you know, along this way. But again, that goes with the ideas and the organization. Can you really guide the reader through things so that they see what you think's important?
How about voice and tone?
That one, I want to be careful with that because I know my colleagues in English would have a way they would explain it. But again, what we want to do is, as I understand it, we want to try to get them, particularly in technical writing, to use an active voice. Now, that does not mean it's first person. There's a big trend now to say, well, if it's not first person, it's not active, and I don't believe that's correct. But the idea is that they see they're engaging the reader, and it's written in a way that's not passive, and it moves them further that way. What's going to happen is, again, if it's written poorly in that way, I use the term indifferent. It's going to look like the writer could really care. And we want to avoid that. We want to avoid seeing mechanical. I think if you keep it active, we may have to work harder to write it in active voice. It's very easy to put it in a passive voice as a writer, but I think the reader gets a much more direct message, and it's much easier for them to read and understand if we do that. So that's what we're trying to do
Sure.
with that part of it. Word choice, and again, this in our field, this could be choosing the right vocabulary.
Sure. The technical.
The technical, if you're writing a legal document, it would be what's the right legalese.
Sure.
And again, in music or other areas, there's going to be their own terminology. Sure. And again, you want it to convey the right message.
That's
so
right.
Word choice could say, how should I say, the unwritten messages. And those sorts of things.
Do you ever find in your writing, this is what I'm finding, they'll use one adjective and use it over and over and over and over again.
Right.
And I'm trying to get my students to, and we look at it from a musical standpoint, which is there's variety in good music and there's variety in good writing. And you don't just use one adjective repeatedly. And that's why thesauruses are around.
Right. Well, and I think it's more important than adjectives. I have a colleague that's helped me a great deal with my professional writing. And you know, when we write together, he's often circling, well, we just use this term twice or three times in the same paragraph. And it's a real, I won't say struggle, but you have to make a conscious effort, I think, to put that variety in our language.
It's another way to look at it when you're writing, too, for our students and for ourselves, to go back and see, well, did I use that term twice? You know, and you kind of read it in a different way when you're looking for that.
Yeah, yes. Fluency seems like a big word, but what I mean by there is it easy to read. And in fact, one of the things I emphasize when I'm grading with the students is I want a document from them that flows. If they've written it well, I should not have to stop and think about what they said. Not in the sense of what they said isn't important and I shouldn't digest it, but if I want to understand their meaning, then I should be able to read it through smoothly. It should flow, and I should understand what they're wanting me to say. Now, occasionally you have to stop and digest it.
Right.
But I'm talking about here those situations where, what in the world did I say here? You know, and so by fluency, it's kind of like, do I have to stop every other sentence? Or can
Try to figure out what they're
figure out. And so that's what we're talking about
One
there.
of my colleagues in another department on campus has them read it aloud before they turn it in.
Oh, that's good.
And I think that's a good idea. Yeah, that's what this is about. We're trying to share ideas with each other.
Lastly, writing conventions, that's grammar. And again, I've weighted that differently because they should have a great deal of facility with that.
By the time they're, what are these, juniors?
We're working, in my case, largely with juniors. They do this as, we now have gone to a 2-semester sequence and we're doing changes there in our curriculum. But we have a junior lab, a senior level lab, and of course then they write in the design. We have a capstone design course, and they do several progress reports and in that sort of thing. But this is where all those things with the grammar and those issues come up.
And if you're cautious, you could pick up some points. You could pick, 10 points right here just by using correct grammar.
Well, and some people might say, well, gee, isn't that making it easy? But again, we're trying to come up with a reasonable curve here. I mean, if you're doing basic conventions and everything right, I mean, that's 50% of it, maybe. But you still have to do a certain amount of the other to move it up. And if we're not doing a good job with the grammar, that's, I find that really slows me up. If I have commas in the wrong spot.
I was thinking that too on your document. If they're not writing with correct grammar, it's going to affect the fluency. It's going to affect the word choice. And it kind of is integrated too.
Exactly. Exactly.
Talk a little bit about how you decided on your point system.
Oh, that's a good question because that could evolve too.
Yeah. Well, and do you find yourself changing?
No, I try not to because this is something I handed. This is on the course website. And so once I get into the semester, I don't want to change this too badly or else I change my, some people would say contract with students. They don't know what the expectations are. I guess a couple of things here. I went with the technical content, the ideas, and the writing conventions weighted heavily. I expect them to do the grammar well.
Expected to be factual.
Expected, and it's important within the lab to develop ideas. It's important to handle the content right. So I weighted that more heavily to, again, try to avoid a 2-grade type system. The others, then I've gone with half as much emphasis. Now, what I've tried to do here is say, for example, on writing conventions, well, if you do excellent grammar, excellent spelling, I wouldn't change a thing other than maybe a couple little personal issues. That's 10 points. It's perfect. And then I've tried to say, okay, it's essentially correct. It's what I would expect from students at this level. And maybe there's something here because they had 3 tests the same week, and so they couldn't spend the time. That's that 6. That
you could improve a little bit, but
right. But that's that mid-average. And then 2 says that, you know, there's some real problems here, and you haven't really gotten the job done. And by doing that, I've kind of defined where I'm at, and then my hope is that as I grade, well, it might be a 6, it might be a 7, it might be a 5, but if I'm in that 7 to 5 range, the students will recognize the quality of work we're talking about. If I give them that 9, that 10, yeah, it might be how I looked at it that particular hour, but the bottom line is that 9, that 10 is going to be pretty indicative of the kind of work
level.
And that looks a little more subjective because it's 10, 6, and 2, but that's to double what I did on the others. And when you look at the, say, word choice, I've got 5, 3, and 1.
Yeah.
So if it's clearly average type work, it's a 3. If it's exceptional work, it's a 5. If it's somewhere in between, a 4. And I can hopefully be fairly consistent about doing 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Right.
And as I've talked with the people who use the 6 trait a lot, if you can go through and, shall we say, train the people doing the assessment, different individuals, I've been told, can be fairly good about putting the same values, within plus or minus a number. And that's the goal, is to get where we can go in and be within plus or minus 1 value of things.
Yeah. Which is amazing, really, if you could get it that consistent. Do you have any, do you set it up where they do one report and then there's going to be another report and another, or do you let them redo?
No, right now what we're doing is they do one after the other, and I know.
And if they're having problems on the first one, you would expect growth.
Right, and they can, of course, come and talk to us as they do it. But the way we've handled it in the past is to look at the growth from one report to the next as they progress through the semester. As we've talked about on campus about writing across the curriculum, I mean, one of the things that comes back is, well, how do we provide feedback? How do we let them learn? And of course, one way to do that is that, well, you do this until you get it right. But that's a lot of work sometimes for faculty, and the students don't get to start from scratch very often in that environment. So we've taken the approach, you're going to do 6, maybe 7 of these reports in the course of the semester. So we're going to provide you feedback on a basis so that you can implement it in the next lab report. And so we are looking for the changes to occur from one report to the next.
And which is growth, you know, and that's what we want.
And it's the feedback. It's just not, well, let's get it right on this one before we move on.
Do you attach one of these to each lab report, or is that how you do the feedback?
The feedback occurs 2 ways ideally. One, they'll get a table. We don't give the full page. They have that in their class materials. But they'll get a broken down table with these comments on it. They'll get the written comments on the lab report. And then the other way is, ideally, the students, we set up time so that the students can come and interact with us about the individual reports as well.
That's good. So you're giving them feedback.
So they get the direct feedback from the instructor, and then they also get a feedback, you know, in this manner with the rubric.
Do you ever do group writing assignments?
Depends on the instructor. Typically we do, and I shouldn't say that. I typically do. If there's 6 lab reports, I will expect 4 full-blown reports. I'll do a memo report, which again, I'll try to use the same rubric, but I tailor some of the interpretation because it's a 3-page memo. And then the other one that I've done recently for the last 2 or 3 times I've taught the classes, I've allowed them to do a group report, and they work in groups anyway. So that gives them a group writing experience. It helps a little bit with the grading load.
And it's realistic for an industry.
Realistic, and it's very realistic with industry. So they will tend to do 4 on their own, so they have that individual writing experience. They'll then do a memo, which is a very different type of experience, and then they'll also do a group report, which, like you say, is realistic and provides a whole different flavor.
About how long would one of the individual reports, just ballpark it?
Again, it slightly depends on who the instructor is. I would say most of us would say if it's not 10 pages, they haven't been very thorough. This is like, the environment is one, if you're going to be on a 6-month project, let's say in industry, here's what you would hand to your supervisor. Obviously, the project's not that long in the lab, but we want an explanation of the background and a full exposition of the data. So I would say anything less than 10 is going to be hard to get the job done. We tend to come on, if you're doing 20, 25 pages, you probably could do a better job handling the material. That depends a bit on how an individual instructor handles data and appendices. The class, the feedback we've gotten over the years in an anecdotal sense has been that they really appreciate the writing skills the students have.
A friend of mine in another college from you, he gets a lot of feedback. They hate it at first because they're writing, pretty intensive writing in one of these classes, and boy, they don't like it. And then after they get out into business, they email him back with these glowing comments. Thank you so much for making us do that.
In fact, one of the more recent ones was a student who took a non-typical job with a company that didn't hire our graduates very often. And they did their first report for their boss after about a 6-month project and brought in a pretty good sized document, but it was well done. The students' language skills were quite good. And it was like, where did this come from? You know, how did you know to do this? And they just couldn't believe the quality of the work that the student had done.
And of course, that's what we want with our products, our K-State products. Can you think of anything else? Have you seen a growth in the product of these reports before you used your trait writings to after? Just anecdotal again. But.
I think I've seen students understanding it better. I think the students have appreciated it because they see the broader picture with this type of rubric. And
they're more clear what you want.
Right. Yeah. I think as a whole, if we don't see the students grow from when they start in this class to when they get done with the semester, we get a little frustrated, shall we say, because the whole point is to help them with their writing skills, and very few have ever written anything like this. So we don't expect that product to be
the first product.
To be very, I shouldn't say very good, but I mean there's not the highest expectation on the first one because it's totally new to them. And so we hope to see growth from one to one, and when we have the students that write a good one now and a mediocre one the next time and then come back and write another good one, that gets frustrating because you'd like to figure out how to flip the switch and say, you know, if you just do these things, you could consistently. But it's fun to see the growth. That's exciting.
It is, yeah. I think it's great. I'm so proud that you were able to adapt what your kids were doing in their schools to your teaching. And I've always said elementary teachers are wonderful teachers because they take kids that don't even want to be there and make them learn. So, thanks a lot.
My pleasure.